What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with the SketchUp free tutorial for you. So in today's video, we're going to go through an introduction of the online free version of SketchUp and kind of how that works. This is kind of going to be a beginner level tutorial for getting started with the app. So I've gotten a lot of questions about doing a tutorial on this version, so let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so in this video, we're going to go through and we're going to kind of get started with the online version of SketchUp. So this is the free version of SketchUp that is now web-based, and so you can access that by going to app.sketchup.com, or if you just go to sketchup.com and go to the free version, you can also access this that way. And so if you're accessing this page for the first time, this will give you kind of a getting started page or a getting started view for this that'll walk you through everything in the free version. Since I've already gone through that, it sees that and it doesn't walk me through that, but I think there's a start tour button you can click in order to get kind of a tour of the way that everything works and where everything's located. So I will also walk you through that. So the first area is the home bar up at the top, and this is where you can access your model preferences. You can save projects up here. So this is kind of where you're going to save things and also access if you want to upload to the 3D warehouse or something like that, you can do that here as well. So this is where you're going to name your model, and you're also going to be able to save it up here. And then on the left-hand side of the page, you've got a toolbar on the left-hand side. These are going to be your toolbars for the tools that you're going to use to draw things inside of SketchUp. So this is where you're going to access the things that you're actually going to use to draw inside of your model. So you can access things like your line tools and your eraser tools. So these are your actual drawing tools over here on the left-hand side. Note that if you click on this and there's a little arrow next to it, a lot of these have multiple tools contained inside of this toolbar, so you can single click on this and then click on one of those tools to activate that particular tool if that's what you want to do. So you can use this to get to all of those different tools just by clicking on these. And so on the right hand side, you've got your panels. Your panels are going to give you more information about like your selected objects inside of SketchUp. So like for example, if I select this model, you can see how you get the entity info for that model. That's also where you're going to be able to access the outliner, which you have to upgrade in order to use that function, but you're also going to be able to access information about your components and your materials and things like that. And you can open and close these just by clicking on the icons and then coming in here and clicking on this X right here if you want to close something that you've opened over here. You can also kind of make this panel go away by clicking on the close panel option right here. In the lower left hand corner, this is going to be your status bar. So this is going to give you the ability to undo and redo. It's going to give you access to help files. You're also going to get information over here about whatever your active tool is. So like right now I have the select tool active, and so it's telling me that with your current tool active you select objects. And then it gives you information about about all the different things you can do with those tools. So like if I was to tap the L key to go into the line tool, you can see how this gives me instructions on how to draw a line using the line tool. So if you're ever using a tool inside of SketchUp and you get stuck and you don't know how to use it, you may want to take a look at the status bar right here, because that'll give you some instruction on what to do with it. And then finally on the lower right hand side of your page, you have your measurements box, and so that's going to have information about the different dimensions and things associated with the tools that you have active. So for example, if I was to come in here and draw a line, you can see how as I move my mouse, the value in that box is changing depending on where my mouse is. So this is going to give you information about the length of things inside of your model. So in addition, you can also type values into this box, and you don't need to click in the box in order to do this. Just whenever you have a tool active, and like for example, if I set my first point with the line tool, you can just type in a length. So let's say I wanted this to be 5 feet long. You can see how I can type in a value of 5 feet, and that's going to show up in my measurements box. So if I hit the enter key, you can see how that draws a line that's 5 feet long. So that's going to give you information about the active tool and the measurements of whatever you're doing. And so before we get started drawing, let's talk just a bit about navigating around inside of your workspace. And your workspace is going to be the area where you're actually going to do your work inside of SketchUp. And so you can see how inside of this space, this is a 3D space that you can navigate around. And there's really two ways to do that. The first is just to come over here and click on either these first person tools or the orbit tool right here. And you can see how there's multiple tools in here for adjusting your view and flying around with your camera in order to get to wherever you want to go inside of the 3D model. For example, the first tool, and the tool you're probably going to use the most, is called the orbit tool. And so you can access that by clicking on this button right here and clicking on the orbit tool. You can see how when you do that, you can then click and drag your left mouse button in order to fly around and orbit around. And so you can also pan by clicking on the little hand. That's going to allow you to drag your view left or right. You can also zoom in by clicking on the zoom button and then clicking on dragging and moving your mouse up and down. And then there's a couple other tools in here as well. This zoom window is going to allow you to drag a box around whatever you want to zoom in on. And then zoom extents is going to zoom your camera model out so that everything inside of your model is going to be inside of your camera view. So you can use this toolbar right here to navigate around. I actually do not recommend this because there's a better way to do that. And the better way to do that is if you have a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel, which is going to be really important if you're going to be using SketchUp a lot. You're really going to want to have that 3-button mouse. What you can do instead is you can click and hold your center mouse button in order to orbit. And so what I'm doing is I'm clicking and holding that scroll wheel down. So I'm clicking it like a button, not rolling it, and holding that. So that allows me to orbit. And then in addition, if I click and hold that button down and I hold the shift key on my keyboard and move my mouse, you can see how this allows me to pan my view around really easily. So by holding that center mouse button and holding the shift key around, you can pan. And then the other thing that's really powerful about this is you can roll the mouse button up and down in order to zoom in and out. So I'm scrolling up with my center mouse button by rolling the wheel up, and I can zoom out by rolling the wheel down. And so that's really going to be the fastest way to move around in your model. You can see I can move around really quickly by quickly toggling between the zoom by rolling my mouse wheel up and down, clicking and holding that in order to orbit, and then clicking and holding the center mouse button and holding the shift key in order to pan. You can see how that allows me to move around this model really quickly. So there's also some first-person tools in here that I don't really want to get into in this video. There are some other navigation tools, but we don't really need to talk about those right now. And so now that we've gone through and talked about navigation and your toolbars and everything else, now let's talk about drawing inside of SketchUp. And so drawing is fairly simple. You just activate a tool by either clicking on it or typing in a keyboard shortcut, and I usually recommend you use keyboard shortcuts because they're a lot faster, but you just activate a tool by clicking on it, and then you just follow the instructions. So in this case, this says to select my start point to draw a line. So if I activate my line tool, you can single click, move your mouse, and then click again to set the end point. And so you can see how this draws a line between those 2 points that I dictate. And one thing that's really important for you to learn from the beginning is don't click and drag when you're doing this, because what that does is that removes the ability for you to type in measurements and to do this precisely. So you can see how by clicking on this line, let's say that we wanted to draw a line that was 5 feet long or 10 feet long. Let's go with 10 feet. So what we would do is we would single click to set our start point. We would move our mouse in the direction that we want to draw, and then we would type in a value of 10 feet and hit the enter key. And so that's why it's really important that you don't click and drag to draw your line. It's important that you single click, move your mouse, and then click again or type in a value. Because if I click and drag like this, I'm holding the mouse button down right here. And let's say I wanted this to be Let's say I wanted this to be a 15-foot 4-inch line or something like that. You can see how I can kind of move my mouse to try to get on that 15-foot 4-inch length, but I can't really get there. And then I can't type in a value because if I let up on my mouse button in order to type in that value, it just draws the line. But on the other hand, if you activate the line tool by tapping the L key, you single click, and then you move your mouse in this direction, note that now I can type in a value of 15 foot 4 inches and hit the enter key. So as long as you don't click and drag, you can type in values for what you want your tool, for the dimension that you want your tool to draw things in. And so it's fairly simple to draw lines inside of SketchUp, but now I want to talk a little bit about creating faces. And so a face is something inside of SketchUp where SketchUp actually fills in the space between lines. So like for example, if I was to draw a line this way, like this, and then like this, what you're going to notice is you get this filled in face inside of this triangle. Well, the reason for that is because SketchUp is what's known as a face modeler. And what that means is SketchUp draws faces anytime you have 3 or more coplanar edges inside of your model. And so coplanar means that all of these edges are on the same plane. So like for example, if I was to come in here and I was to draw a line like this along the green axis, and we'll talk about the axes in a second, and then draw an edge up like this, and then draw another edge like this one down here, and then close this in, you can see how SketchUp doesn't actually fill in a face, because even though I have 4 edges in here, they're not on the same plane, meaning this edge and this edge are on the blue plane or the flat plane, and this edge are on the red plane, which is a vertical plane. But you can see how SketchUp isn't filling in a face because this doesn't have 3 or more coplanar edges. However, if you were to come in here and draw a line from here to here, you can see how SketchUp actually fills a face in both vertically and horizontally, because now you have 1, 2, 3 coplanar edges here. You have 1, 2, 3 coplanar edges here. And so that works for multiple different edges. So like for example, if we were to draw like a rectangle all on the same plane, you can see how SketchUp would fill that in because all those edges are on that plane. And so now let's talk a little bit about healing faces and deleting edges and things like that. Because what you could do in this situation is if you wanted to, you can select both the face or any of these edges just by clicking on them. Well, if you were to come in here and you were to delete out this edge, by selecting it and then hitting the delete key, you can see how there's no longer a face inside of this shape because it now doesn't have 3 or more closed coplanar edges. You can see how these edges are all coplanar, but it's not actually closed in. And so if we wanted to get that face back, all we would have to do is just redraw across this edge. So you can see I just drew a line from here to here, and that allowed me to heal this face inside of SketchUp. And so another thing to note is sometimes a face like this one, you can actually select it, and you can see how this is indicating that it's selected because you get all of these little dots in here. Usually things turn kind of a bluish color when they're selected inside of SketchUp. Well, let's say this face got selected, then you hit the delete key to delete that face out. Well, if you wanted to heal that face back in, what you could do is you could just trace over one of these edges with the line tool, and you can see how this fills this back in whenever we draw that edge. And so now I want to talk just a bit about these different colors that are showing up when we have tools active. So let's say, for example, that we activate the line tool by tapping the L key again. And you can see how if I start moving my mouse over different edges, I start getting these little different shapes and colors, and dotted lines start showing up, and all those different things. Well, what those are is those are a part of SketchUp's inference engine. And SketchUp's inference engine is where SketchUp tries to figure out where you want to draw different things. So it kind of guesses where you want to draw, and it also gives you little tips. So like for example, if I activate this line tool and move my mouse over this line, you can see how this blue circle indicates that this is the midpoint of that line, meaning I can find the middle of this edge, and I can draw off of that by clicking on that point where that midpoint is. So that's one way that you can do that. There's different inferences that you get by hovering over edges. So like for example, if I hover over this edge with the line tool active and then I move my mouse, you can see how I get a dotted line coming off of that end that's kind of indicating that if I was to draw a line from this point, it would be level with the point that I had kind of moused over. And so we can talk more about those in the future, but those give you kind of an idea of what you're drawing along. And the most important one that you need to be aware of is when you have a tool active like the line tool, you need to be most aware of the ones that are indicating that you're drawing along a certain axis. And the reason for that is whenever you're drawing inside of SketchUp, you want to make sure you're drawing along an axis so that you can be sure things are coplanar. So you can see how as I move my mouse, if I move my mouse here, it tells me I'm drawing this on the red axis. But if I move my mouse here, it's telling me I'm drawing on the blue axis, which would be more of a vertical line. And so what you need to do is you need to make sure when you're drawing something like this rectangle that you're drawing along these red and green axes, just to make sure that everything's coplanar. Because if you don't, what happens is you come in here and you start drawing and you draw a little edge right here, like up like this, and then you accidentally draw a line from this edge to this edge and from this edge to this edge. And you can see how even though this looks like a full-on rectangle, because this line wasn't actually drawn along the green axis or the red axis, you can see how you can't really close this in because all of your edges aren't coplanar. So if you're not modeling along the axes when you're doing this, you start running into big problems kind of like this one. And so one thing that you can do in order to make sure that you're drawing along those different axes is when you activate a tool, and like for example with the line tool, if I set my first point, if you tap either the left arrow key, the right arrow key, or the up arrow key, this will actually lock your different tools to the different axes. So let's do another example. If we activate the rectangle tool by tapping the R key, you can see how I can tap my left, right, or up arrow keys in order to dictate if I'm going to draw a line, or if I'm going to draw a rectangle along the green, if I'm going to draw a rectangle along the red, or if I'm going to draw a rectangle along the blue. So you can see how by tapping those arrow keys with those tools active, you can force this to draw along whatever axis you want this to draw along. And so in the remaining time, I want to talk about going to 3D inside of SketchUp. And so let's say, for example, that I have this rectangle right here, and I want this to become like it's not a cube, but more of a 3D rectangle. So you can see how what I'm doing is I'm coming in here and I'm drawing out all of these different edges. And by the way, to lock to an inference, you can hold the shift key in order to lock that along whatever your inference is. So you can see how as I hold the shift key down at this tool active, whatever axis inference I have active, you can see how that's locking in. So now I can draw a line that lines up with like one of these edges or something like that just by holding that shift key. But you can see how if I come in here and I draw in all of these different faces, you can see how I can make a 3D shape like a box by manually drawing in all of these edges. The problem is that's really time consuming. So you could come in here and draw everything manually if you really wanted to, or you can use a tool inside of SketchUp called the push-pull tool. And what the push-pull tool does is that takes a face, like this one, and it extrudes it into 3D. So you can see how by activating that tool, either by clicking on this or tapping the P key on your keyboard, you can mouse over a face, single click, and move your mouse in order to extrude this into 3 dimensions. And so basically that's taking this face, it's moving it up, and then it's filling in the geometry around all the different edges to make this a 3D shape. So you're going to use the push-pull tool a lot in order to create different 3D things. And so not only can you use the push-pull tool to add material, you can also use it to remove material. And so let's say, for example, that I drew an arc across this edge right here. You can see how what I did is I split this face into 2 different faces. Well, now I could activate the push-pull tool, and remember how before we used this to add material. Well, if I single click on this face and move my mouse to the back, you can see how what this does is this actually removes material. And one thing to note about this is you see how I'm getting this message that says the offset is limited. You can see how I can't push-pull this back any further because this has reached the end of the shape that's back here. Well, one thing you're going to notice is if you move your mouse all the way to the back and then really anywhere along this edge right here and you click, what SketchUp's going to do is it's going to automatically delete out this material that was left over because it's using its inferencing engine to figure out that you've removed the material all the way along an object, and it needs to delete out this flat plane right here. But this works for curved edges. This also works if you were just to draw a single edge across here. You can push-pull that and then click on this back face. And then you can also cut a hole using this same method. So if I use the circle tool by tapping the C key and drawing a circle on this face, I could then activate the push-pull tool, click on this face, and move my mouse until I can click on this back face right here. So you can see how I can actually push-pull this further in this situation, and it's just going to add material to the back right here. Well, you don't want to do that. What you can do instead is if you rotate around to the back side using the orbit tool and you click somewhere on this back face, SketchUp is going to see that you've extruded this all the way through to the back side of an object, and it's going to automatically delete out that face. So you can see how this allows you to cut holes in objects really easily. So if I draw a rectangle along here and then use push-pull, that's going to allow me to cut a rectangular shape through this object. So this is going to be one of the primary tools that you're going to use for modeling different things inside of SketchUp. And so, like for example, let's say we were to build a house or something like that. If we were to draw a wall, push-pull it up, and then draw a rectangle across it, we would use the push-pull tool to cut an opening for a window inside of that wall. And so that's going to be probably the primary way that you're going to create 3D geometry inside of SketchUp. So that's where I'm going to end this video. So in the next video, we're probably going to go through and model something like a basic house to give you kind of an idea of how all of these tools tie together so that you can model different things inside the free version of SketchUp. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing on this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. So make sure you check out that link in the notes down below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.